While the world remembers Rosie the Riveter with her rolled-up sleeves and determined smile, thousands of women were dodging bullets in occupied territories, piloting fighter planes through enemy fire, and cracking codes that would save countless lives. These weren't just supporting players in the greatest conflict of the 20th century. They were warriors, spies, and heroes whose stories have been buried beneath decades of incomplete history. What if I told you that some of the most daring missions, the most brilliant intelligence breakthroughs, and the most courageous acts of resistance came not from the men we read about in textbooks, but from women who risked everything for freedom? If you're ready to discover the real stories that textbooks left out, hit that like button now and let's uncover the truth together. And don't forget to subscribe, because history this compelling deserves to be shared with everyone who values courage and sacrifice. When we think of women in World War II, most of us picture the same scene: rows of women in coveralls, building planes and ships in American factories. This image, while important, tells only a fraction of the story. The Rosie the Riveter narrative, though inspiring, has overshadowed the incredible diversity of roles women played during the war. Yes, 6 million American women entered the workforce, taking jobs previously held by men. But this familiar story has created a blind spot in our understanding of women's contributions. While American women were indeed vital on the home front, millions of other women across the globe were fighting, spying, and dying on the front lines of the war. The factory floor narrative, comfortable and safe, has allowed us to avoid the more complex and dangerous realities of women's wartime experiences. It's time to look beyond the assembly line and discover the women who shaped the outcome of the war through acts of extraordinary courage and skill. Deep in the English countryside, at a place called Bletchley Park, some of the war's most crucial battles were being fought not with guns and bombs, but with pencils, paper, and brilliant minds. 3/4 of the codebreakers working to crack the German Enigma machine were women. These weren't secretaries or assistants. They were mathematicians, linguists, and analysts, whose work shortened the war by an estimated 2 to 4 years. Mavis Beatty, a young woman barely out of her teens, broke Italian naval codes that led directly to British victories in the Mediterranean. Her work was so sensitive that she couldn't tell her own husband what she did during the war until the 1970s. Anne Mitchell, working on Japanese diplomatic codes, helped provide crucial intelligence about enemy movements in the Pacific Theater. Across the Atlantic, American women were equally vital to intelligence operations. Virginia Hall, an American with a wooden leg she nicknamed Cuthbert, became one of the most effective Allied spies in occupied France. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies and put a bounty on her head. She organized resistance networks, coordinated supply drops, and helped downed Allied airmen escape to safety. In the Soviet Union, women like Lyudmila Pavlichenko were making their mark as snipers, but others were working in intelligence roles that remain classified to this day. Soviet women served as radio operators, code specialists, and field agents, often working behind enemy lines in conditions of extreme danger. These intelligence operations weren't desk jobs. Women working in occupied territories faced torture and death if caught. They carried false papers, memorized complex codes, and lived double lives for months or years at a time. Their mental toughness and attention to detail made them particularly effective in intelligence work, though their contributions have often been minimized or forgotten entirely. In Nazi-occupied Europe, resistance movements became the backbone of hope for millions of people living under brutal oppression. Women didn't just support these movements, they led them, fought in them, and died for them. In France, women made up nearly 20% of the resistance fighters. Lucie Aubrac helped plan the rescue of her husband and other resistance leaders from Nazi custody, personally participating in armed operations against German forces. Simone Seguin, barely 18 years old, fought in the liberation of Paris, carrying a submachine gun and leading attacks on German positions. The French resistance relied heavily on women because they could move more freely than men without arousing suspicion. They carried messages, weapons, and supplies. They provided safe houses and medical care. They gathered intelligence and coordinated operations. Many paid the ultimate price. Thousands were executed, tortured, or sent to concentration camps. In Poland, women like Irena Sendler risked everything to save lives. Working as a social worker, Sendler smuggled 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, hiding them with Polish families or in orphanages. She kept detailed records of each child's identity, burying the information in jars under an apple tree, hoping to reunite families after the war. When the Gestapo finally caught her, they broke her legs and arms during torture, but she never revealed the location of the children or the names of her collaborators. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943 saw women fighting alongside men in desperate street battles against overwhelming German forces. Zivia Lubetkin and other women leaders helped organize the resistance, smuggled weapons, and fought in the final battles as the ghetto burned around them. In the Netherlands, women like Hannie Schaft became legendary figures in the resistance. Known as the girl with the red hair, Schaft carried out sabotage operations and assassinations of Nazi collaborators. She was executed just 3 weeks before the Netherlands was liberated, but her courage inspired countless others to continue the fight. Dutch women also played crucial roles in hiding Allied airmen and helping them escape to safety. The Comet Line, which helped downed airmen reach neutral Spain, relied heavily on women couriers who could travel without attracting attention. These women walked hundreds of miles through occupied territory, often carrying forged documents and facing death if discovered. In Yugoslavia, women fought as partisans in Josip Broz Tito's communist resistance movement. An estimated 100,000 women served as partisans, with 25,000 dying in combat. They fought in regular military units, served as medics and communications specialists, and participated in some of the war's most brutal fighting in the Balkans. Perhaps nowhere were women's combat contributions more dramatic than in aviation. While most countries restricted women to support roles, the Soviet Union broke new ground by deploying women in direct combat as pilots, navigators, and ground crew. The most famous of these units was the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, known to the Germans as the Night Witches. Flying obsolete Po-2 biplanes that were little more than canvas and wood, these women conducted over 23,000 combat missions, dropping 3,000 tons of bombs on German targets. They flew multiple missions each night, often taking off and landing in complete darkness. The Night Witches developed innovative tactics to compensate for their aircraft's limitations. They would approach targets at high altitude, then cut their engines and glide silently toward their targets, releasing bombs before the enemy could react. The Germans were so frustrated by these attacks that they offered Iron Cross medals to any pilot who shot down a Night Witch. Nadezhda Popova flew 852 combat missions and was shot down several times. She once had to make an emergency landing in a field where she and her navigator were nearly captured by German troops. They hid in a sunflower field for hours before making their way back to Soviet lines. The Soviet Union also fielded the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, an all-female unit that flew interceptor missions defending Soviet cities from German bombers. Pilots like Lydia Litviak, known as the White Rose of Stalingrad, became aces, shooting down multiple German aircraft in aerial combat. In Britain, women served in the Air Transport Auxiliary, ATA, ferrying aircraft from factories to airfields and between bases. These women flew every type of aircraft in the Royal Air Force inventory, from small trainers to heavy bombers, often in dangerous weather conditions and without radio navigation aids. They delivered over 308,000 aircraft during the war, with 15 women losing their lives in service. American women served in the Women Air Force Service Pilots (WASP) program, performing similar duties to their British counterparts. Over 1,000 women served as WASPs, flying 60 million miles and delivering 12,150 aircraft. They tested new aircraft, towed targets for gunnery practice, and flew simulated combat missions to train male pilots and gunners. Jackie Cochran, who led the WASP program, was already a famous aviator before the war. She personally flew a bomber across the Atlantic to demonstrate that women could handle large aircraft in combat conditions. Despite their service, WASPs weren't considered military personnel and received no benefits when the program ended in 1944. The Soviet Union was unique among major powers in deploying women in direct ground combat roles. Over 800,000 Soviet women served in combat positions during the war, including as snipers, tank crews, machine gunners, and infantry soldiers. Lyudmila Pavlichenko became the most successful female sniper in history, with 309 confirmed kills during the siege of Sevastopol and other battles. She was wounded 4 times, but continued fighting until she was finally pulled from combat and sent on a publicity tour to the United States and Britain to boost morale and support for the Soviet war effort. Soviet women snipers were particularly effective because they possessed the patience, discipline, and attention to detail that made for successful sniping. They would lie motionless for hours in carefully camouflaged positions, waiting for the perfect shot. Many worked in pairs, with one woman spotting targets while the other fired. Rosa Shanina, another Soviet sniper, was credited with 59 confirmed kills before she was killed in action in 1945. She kept a detailed diary of her experiences, providing rare insight into the psychological toll of combat on women soldiers. Her writings reveal both the pride she took in her marksmanship and the emotional cost of taking human lives. In addition to snipers, Soviet women served in tank crews, artillery units, and as machine gunners. Maria Oktyabrskaya sold her possessions to buy a tank, which she named Fighting Girlfriend, and served as its driver and mechanic. She was killed in action while repairing her tank under enemy fire. The Soviet Union also deployed women as combat medics, who often had to crawl into no man's land under fire to retrieve wounded soldiers. These women saved thousands of lives, often at great personal risk. Many were killed or wounded while performing their duties. Even in countries that didn't deploy women in direct combat, women served in military roles that were dangerous and vital to the war effort. In Britain, women served in anti-aircraft units, operating radar equipment and manning searchlights during German bombing raids. The Women's Royal Naval Service, WWII, included women who served as radio operators, radar specialists, and intelligence analysts. They worked in coastal defense installations, often under direct enemy fire during German raids on British ports. American women served in the Women's Army Corps, WAC, the Navy Waves, and the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. While officially barred from combat, many served in forward areas where they faced enemy fire. Army nurses served in field hospitals close to the front lines, treating wounded soldiers under dangerous conditions. In the Pacific Theater, American military women served on islands that were still under threat of Japanese attack. They worked as communications specialists, maintaining vital radio links between scattered Allied forces. Many were evacuated under fire when Japanese forces threatened their positions. The women who served in combat and resistance roles paid a heavy price for their courage. Thousands were killed in action, executed by enemy forces, or died in concentration camps. Many more were wounded, both physically and psychologically, by their wartime experiences. Soviet women combat veterans faced particular challenges after the war. Many found it difficult to readjust to civilian life after years of combat. Some were viewed with suspicion by Soviet authorities, who worried that their wartime experiences had made them too independent and outspoken. Women resistance fighters who survived the war often found their contributions minimized or forgotten. Many countries were reluctant to acknowledge that women had participated in violent resistance activities, preferring to remember them in more traditional roles. The psychological toll on women who served in combat roles was often overlooked. Like their male counterparts, many suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, but they received little support or recognition for their mental health struggles. Why have these stories remained hidden for so long? The answer lies in a combination of factors that conspired to erase women's combat contributions from popular memory. First, many of the women's wartime activities were classified for decades after the war ended. Intelligence operations, resistance activities, and special operations remained secret, preventing the women involved from sharing their stories publicly. Second, post-war societies were eager to return to traditional gender roles. Acknowledging that women had served effectively in combat challenged conventional ideas about femininity and women's capabilities. It was easier to focus on women's contributions in factories and support roles than to confront the reality that women could be effective warriors. Third, many women themselves were reluctant to discuss their wartime experiences. Combat veterans often struggled to talk about their experiences, and this was particularly true for women who faced additional social pressure to conform to traditional feminine roles after the war. Finally, military and political leaders had institutional reasons to downplay women's combat contributions. Acknowledging women's effectiveness in combat would have raised uncomfortable questions about why they were excluded from military service in peacetime. In recent decades, historians and researchers have worked to uncover and document women's wartime contributions. Archives have been opened, interviews conducted with surviving veterans, and new research has revealed the full scope of women's participation in the war. Countries have begun to officially recognize women's contributions. The Soviet Union awarded combat decorations to thousands of women veterans, though many awards came decades after the war ended. The United States finally granted military status to WASP veterans in 1977, more than 30 years after their service ended. Museums and memorials now include exhibits dedicated to women's wartime service. The National WWII Museum in New Orleans, the Imperial War Museum in London, and other institutions have created displays highlighting women's contributions beyond traditional support roles. Books, documentaries, and films have brought these stories to wider audiences. Works like A Dance with Death by Anne Noggle, which documents Soviet women combat pilots, and The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich, which presents oral histories of Soviet women veterans, have helped preserve these important stories. As we remember World War II, we must ensure that the full story is told. The women who fought, spied, and died for freedom deserve recognition alongside their male counterparts. Their stories are not footnotes to history. They are central to understanding how the war was won. These women faced the same dangers as men, showed the same courage under fire, and made the same ultimate sacrifice when necessary. They proved that heroism knows no gender and that freedom is worth fighting for, regardless of who does the fighting. Their legacy lives on in every woman who serves in the military today, every woman who breaks barriers in traditionally male fields, and every person who stands up for what is right in the face of overwhelming odds. The next time you think about World War II, remember not just the men who stormed the beaches and flew the bombers, but also the women who cracked the codes, led the resistance, and fought in the skies. Their courage helped save the world, and their stories deserve to be told. These incredible women changed history, but their stories have been hidden for too long. If this opened your eyes to the real heroes of World War II, show your appreciation by hitting that like button. It helps more people discover these amazing stories. Share this with your friends and family because everyone deserves to know about these forgotten warriors. And subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from history that will change how you see the past. These women fought for our freedom. The least we can do is remember their names and honor their sacrifice.